Okay, so we are live now. Yeah, that's a whole conversation that we can have another time. I think that's one of the
Yep.
spaces that we struggle with. Yeah, I mean that's the same thing that happened
Yep.
with Boomy when we started out. And it's so interesting because the younger ones have, for whatever reason, I guess with Netflix, they start watching what's that show called? That was the HBU show when HBCU show when we were in school. Um, a different
Different
world.
world.
And so then they start getting excited about HBCUs and they're like, oh, well, why we didn't go to HBCU? But anyway, that's a whole other thing. Let's go ahead and get started. So let me just jump in. Good afternoon,
Mhm.
everyone. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade, and I just need to acknowledge that today is a historic moment. I think it's a historic moment for the country. It's a historic moment for Georgia, and particularly for people of African descent and our Jewish brothers and sisters. What we know is that I call him Dr. Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is the senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church, has won the Senate election, and he will be the first African-American senator from Georgia to serve in the U.S. Senate. And CNN is projecting, although the race has not been officially called, CNN is projecting that Ossoff is in the lead and that he will win. And one of the things that stands out to me about these two historic elections is the fact that not only did African Americans show up and show out, that we also were led by two Black women. I mean, there were lots of folks, but there were two Black women in particular that are from the Deep South, that were raised in the Deep South, that helped to make this historic election successful. So that's Stacey Abrams, who, although was born in Wisconsin, she was raised in Mississippi, and then also Latasha Brown, who was from Selma, Alabama. And I think that this becomes really important as we look at Black women's power. And this conversation that we're going to have today about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, we need to be able to think about the power of Black women. The two candidates, Ossoff and Warnock's opponents, really campaigned on white supremacy. That was their only really tagline in everything that they did. It was all about white supremacy. And despite that, despite their arrogance, despite the fact that an African American and a Jewish man have never won in Georgia, we showed out in this election. And I think that is significant no matter where you fall on the political stream in terms of the social injustice that's been happening in this country. And so I want to use that as a backdrop to start this conversation today. I have my colleagues that I'm going to introduce in a second. And I want to start out by my longtime friend, a brother that has been part of this struggle from the perspective of the Black Arts Movement, and has really taught me things about the Black Arts Movement. My brother, Lord, I'm talking too much, Twa Nanabaluku, who is a former theater teacher at Tri-Cities High School. And Twa is the first person that introduced me to August Wilson's work and the significance of his work. And so I asked him to come on today so you can hear why August Wilson's work is significant for African Americans. So I just want to thank you for coming. Hey, Twa, what's up?
How you doing? How you doing?
I'm good. So talk to us about August work. Why is it significant for African Americans?
Okay. One of the things that makes his work so significant is when I started studying him at FAMU, was that one of the things they always talk about is that he has this thing called the Pittsburgh cycle, and that nobody else in the arts have been able to do. He's taken the Black experience. Nobody has done this with the white experience either. And he's been able to write these 10 plays that take place over a century. And they're all connected. All of his plays, except for Ma Rainey, takes place in Pittsburgh, which is where he's from. And a lot of people don't know a lot about Pittsburgh. And I didn't know a lot about Pittsburgh until I started doing work. But he these plays and he deals with just the ordinary life of Black people. He's not trying to, romanticize it. When you look at his play that everybody's seen, the movie Fences, it's centered around a garbage man.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the lead character that Denzel played was, a garbage man.
Right.
He had plays to deal with. One of my favorite is called Joe Turner Come and Gone. And what makes his work so significant is the way he writes it. August says that he doesn't sit, it's very spiritual the way he writes. He said he doesn't sit and have a plan. He said he listens to blues music. That's what makes him write. And he said these characters talk to him. They actually come in the room and tell him what to write. And he was like, that's how his characters are created. And when you read it, like when you read a play like Joe Turner Come and Gone, where they talk about an out of bones, you know, and this fictitious dream that this guy has. And he goes and has these reoccurring I guess content in his pieces that bring us back to not just Black folks struggling to live every day, but also to our spiritual being. And I wish everyone would get a chance just to read some of his stuff, because if you read it, you'll see how he brings that into. He has like this beautiful piece called King Headley. That was one of his later pieces before he died, which is about this guy who's an ex-con. And when you look into his yard, there's a little plant, there's a little flower that's trying to grow, but it won't grow. And so all through the play, they're talking about this little plant. But then all of a sudden, King Headley gets killed in his yard, and that plant begins to grow. And so what that kind of started to symbolize is that that plant needed his sacrifice in order to start to grow. And that community was because King Headley was not a good person. And so the community kind of had to sacrifice him in order for that community to change. And then you have a character in a couple of plays called Aunt Esther. She lived to be 100 and something years old. So she's gone through slavery. She's gone through a lot of these things. And Jim of the Ocean is her play, where he actually deals with her. Felicia Rashad played her on Broadway. And he just has all of this real textured, very Black, nuanced content in all his work. And I challenge everybody, if you get a chance, read some of his stuff. I mean, but the thing is that once you read one, you're going to want to read another one and read another one and read another one. And what I also like is that he centers a lot of his stuff around strong Black women characters. You know, when you look at Fences, the play with Viola Davis playing the lead female role, you look at that, all of his plays have a Black woman centered in it.
And so
he's very much
I thank you for that. What I want to do is I want to bring in now my colleague, Dr. Corrie Claiborne, who is Associate Professor of Literature at Morehouse College. And I want you to talk about this, Dr. Claiborne, because Twa talked about just this talking about that literature aspect. And so if you can just kind of talk to us a little bit about this from the perspective of literature, because, I mean, it's a different type of literature, but, I mean, August Wilson is a writer. So talk to us a little bit about Ma Rainey.
Right. Thank you. And I am so glad, like Twa brought up, that people should read the play, because they're like anything, the book is different than the movie, right? And what is really rich is the spirit that Wilson puts into his books, right? Into his plays, which are meant, like most like African traditions are oral, right? So partly what I think that you want to imagine is this blues, is this rhythm, is the way things sound, right? Like this whole Ma Rainey is a blues song, right? And music and literature go together. And what I always tell people, I've taught Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, I've taught Joe Turner's Come and Gone, which is like, he said that was his favorite. That's probably my favorite play too. But when you go through the century cycle, so he does a play for every decade of the 20th century. The first one in the 1910s is Joe Turner's Come and Gone. The second one is Ma Rainey's, which is in the 1920s. The third one is, I'm blanking. It's either Piano Lesson. The fourth one is Fences, so on, so forth, right? And so it takes a decade. And then what you really want to think about when you look at this is what thematic areas is he covering in that decade? So Joe Turner's Come and Gone, set in Pittsburgh, is about Black people first getting out of slavery and really the sort of difficult adjustments that makes. Ma Rainey is 1920, set in Chicago. It is 1927. It's right in that rush of people and the Great Migration from places like Mississippi and Alabama to Chicago and New York. And it really is about the way that our artistic traditions changed culture, right? Not only change culture, but then get stolen, right? Mm-hmm. So it's about both of those things. And it's about exploitation. It's about really how there was a broken promise in the North. A lot of people got up to wherever they were going and found out that, you know, white people were just as dastardly in Chicago as they were in Mississippi, right? Like there was a new thing to fight, right? I.e., they get to Chicago, they have huge race riots, all this other kind of stuff, right? So it's thematic. And so what I think is really neat is that every era of the Black experience he tries to deal with, and he brings in music, much the way Langston Hughes did, right? Everything has a blues, right? Like it has a sound. And he's saying that if you know our experience, then you can understand the blues, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I didn't mean to make you, take you out of the screen. I was trying to fix it so I can highlight.
That's okay. But so yeah, it's about the long story of African Americans, and he took 100 years to sort of tell that long story, right?
Mm-hmm. Got it. So as you say that, then of course I got to bring in my historian, Dr. Kenja McCray, who's over at Atlanta Metropolitan State College. Dr. McCray, talk to us from a historic perspective. As you looked at this and you looked at it from a historical lens, what were your thoughts?
My thoughts were much like Professor Claiborne's. This is, in particular, I think, a wonderful teaching tool to discuss the legacies of enslavement and the Great Migration, but it's not. And I was reviewing some of the items that are out there on the internet about the play itself in the movie. Netflix UK and Ireland called it a biopic. It's not a biography of Ma Rainey. No. So it's not a teaching tool. It's a conversation starter for Ma Rainey's life, the historical truth of it. But it's not a realistic depiction. It doesn't center her. It centers Levy. But a wonderful starting point to talk about the promises and the perils of the Great Migration. A couple of people, George C. Wolfe, the playwright, and Imani Perry, a professor of African American studies, really got in there and dug into the aspects of it to talk about the social interactions, the Black-white race relations that are explored in the movie and the play. And they definitely brought out these ideas about how it's almost like these migrants, when they left their very highly segregated spaces in the South, had to interact with the white power structure in a very raw, naked way that they didn't have to in certain ways in the South. So while I agree, like they're dealing with these broken promises, if you look into Ma Rainey's experience in Columbus, Georgia, before she migrated or was interacting with these people at Paramount, the recording company that she worked with that recorded her work between 1925 and 1928, I think. She was working for what was termed a man who was termed one of the richest Negroes in Jacksonville, Florida. And at the time of his death, around the time of his death, he was trying to get his performers, including Ma and Pa Rainey, one of the best Pullman railway cars to travel in that anybody had ever seen. So then you have in the play and the movie to see Ma Rainey dealing with these white men who are agents and things like that who don't really respect her. But one of the themes is she knows her worth, even if they don't. So I really like those parts. And I have another aspect of the history that I want to talk about later that has to do with what this broken promise then really sets the stage for in reality in terms of the Great Migration.
So what I want to go to, I was debating back and forth. So Kumba, I'm gonna come to you next, but I want to go to my sister Reverend, EI, Estee, Nena, Dillard, and I need you to talk about this piece because even though this isn't a biopic of Ma Rainey, it does create a great introduction into her life. And so we know that. Well, I did not know that essentially Ma Rainey in 1920s was openly gay. She wrote lyrics. So if you look at her lyrics, she just out there. Very clear. I ain't feeling men. I like women. And you see this in the film. And I was like, is this right? I mean, I was so confused that I had to go look more because I was like, was she that gangster? Talk to me about that.
I mean, yeah, and she wasn't alone. So, Ma Rainey mentors Bessie Smith, but there are groups of blues women, and they were actually majority queer Black women, larger body women also, and they asserted their power and their sexuality in a way that was very intentional, that was very clear. And so the lyrical, for me, seems to be the backdrop of what happens when you are able to watch footage and how they physically were very clear about their sexuality. And it's important, too, because Ma Rainey gets her name from being married to Pa Rainey, So, like, this relationship that she has with this man, which introduces her into blues as her profession, is a critical relationship, and she leaves that relationship to be queer. So it's important to kind of know the threads of these sexual narratives as much as the other components of our African American stories, because we don't get gospel music without the blues. And the role that we then see in the threads where we see connections later in African American culture very much so come from these blues women. And we also have to remember, particularly in the South, the safe haven that these blues spaces were. So to know and to not make invisible that they were not just safe havens for people physically, for Black folks culturally, but also for queer folks.
Okay. And that's the thing that I think was just like really amazing about seeing this. And so it makes me, and I'll go back to you. I'm going to ask Twa still in the green room. I'm wondering if that's actually in the play, because I saw the movie, but I didn't actually see the actual written play, because I thought that was really intriguing. And so, and I did not say, I give you props that Reverend Dillard is the owner of Inner Spiritual Counseling. I gave a prop to everybody else up, so I got to say that about you. Now I want to bring in my sister, Kaumba Nozibele Waithe. All of us got 50 million African names as different decades of our lives, okay? And so Professor Waithe is the owner of Grand Tressa, and her hair is always looking better than mine. And so she does all kinds of natural hair products, but she's also an anthropologist. And so I really wanted you to kind of just jump in this conversation from the perspective of anthropology.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's really important that you all brought up the queer aspect of Ma Rainey as portrayed in the film. But when I watched this film as an anthropologist, I looked at it in terms of symbols. So if I say something to you all like, what does the color red invoke to you? Right? Everybody would say danger, or they may say stop, or I say, what does the color green on packaging mean? You might say that it implies that something is healthier or something is good for you. You associate it with the earth, right? Mm-hmm. So when I'm looking at Ma Rainey, I'm looking at how they are portraying her body as a symbol, how they're portraying her body as a queer woman during this time. And there was a lot of things that struck me about the representation that they had of her. I know we're all going to get into the excessive sweating. We're going to get into the raccoon makeup, all of these things that they've done to Black bodies, because we understand it as anthropologists that this isn't just a body. The body is a site where you have your social self, you have your historical self, and you have your cultural self. So we need to look at those different aspects of Ma Rainey. How was her body portrayed culturally? You know, what were some of the historical markers that her body portrayed just by the mannerisms, even the positioning of the house? We can say that the musicians were in the basement, you know, the bottom tier. The white people occupied the highest level because they were in the recording studio. But Ma Rainey, she occupied the middle sphere, so a liminal space, right? So she's just there hovering. Even though the play was supposed to be about her as a Black woman, she still occupied this nebulous space. So that has us, you know, start to think about what does that say about women and women's power and women's bodies. So we can get into that. So that's how I viewed it.
You're on mute, sis. You're on mute, sis.
And I feel like I was doing good right there. I feel like
you were talking.
Okay.
You look like you was handling business.
I had it. And this way you gotta have a conversation with different people from different perspectives. Because I ain't see all that Kuumba just said. I ain't see none of that. Okay. In this, I'm thinking about from the mental health perspective. But my sister Thandi, Chimurenga, who is a journalist, an author, a social commentator, you know, you got to give us this perspective. I mean, I need you to tie this in to this historic moment now. Particularly what I'm interested in is these opening scenes with Ma Rainey and her getting into it with the cops. And of course, I'm thinking that's gonna go left. I didn't expect to see what I saw.
Well, right. Before we get there, so I didn't see or read the play. Okay. But of course, I'm familiar with August Wilson's work. Of course, I am. So I didn't. I came across one commentary, a review on the play. I put it out of my mind. I get into it. I'm watching it, and then I decide, even before I finish, let me go see, in preparation for today, what a couple other people are seeing. You know, I snuck and cheated, then come back and finish watching. So in the very, very beginning, and so I'm looking at this, I'm wondering, what is August Wilson doing? But then again, I'm wondering, what am I doing, right? In the very beginning, I'm like, wait, are these runaway slaves? Okay, well, are they escaping from a chain gang? No, they just trying to get to see Ma Rainey in a tent. And so then afterwards, I'm thinking about those hush harbors, the safe spaces for us that were out in the woods, where you had to trek for a minute. You didn't just go out your back door and kick it. You had to trek. And these were the spaces that were a ways away, that provided safety. Places that you might have come across when you was running on the chain gang, or when you was trying to escape from slavery. We know that it was the hush harbor where you went and had your prayer meetings and your rebellion meetings during the times of enslavement. But now we're out of quote unquote slavery. We still way off out in the woods someplace where we can be ourselves. We can be with each other. We can be in the presence of nature and our ancestors and have our sacred spaces, our hush harbors. So I can appreciate that. I'm not sure what the year was, but that scene, Barnesville, Georgia, right? But coming up to Chicago, and staring off with the white folks after the car accident with the white policeman, I'm like, ooh, she had it like that. She that kind of sister. Okay, after my own heart. I ain't thinking about you white folk. And that was her entire demeanor throughout. I don't need y'all. I'm going to go back to my tour. I'm going to go back to my people. I'm happy being on that circuit. I'm happy being out in the woods at the Hush Harbor. My people love me. They have made me who I am, and I'm good with that. So I don't need this recording. I don't need you people. The other thing I appreciated, one of the things that they talk about so often when you do deal with screenwriting in terms of dialogue, they don't want it to be too on the nose. I like being on the nose. I like hearing characters say the kinds of things that I'm thinking. Say it out loud. We might all be thinking it, but it doesn't always get translated into the actual words that the characters speak. So I appreciated her and Coleman Domingo having that conversation about exploitation. She said, they back there right now calling me every name but a child of God. Mm-hmm. They only want me for my music. And after they get that, they're going to discard me. I know what's going on. I know what's up. I'm going to milk this for every chance I get. As a matter of fact, it reminded me when she did that, like I said, she's carrying this demeanor the entire time. I don't need you. Mm-hmm. I could go home and I'm good, right? Go get me my Coke. I ain't doing nothing until I get my Coca-Cola. Go get me my, and then it reminded me of Shonda Rhimes. Mm. Shonda Rhimes had that multi-million-dollar contract with Disney. Shonda Rhimes could have bought she could have bought every black person in America a pass to Disneyland. If she wanted to, she got that kind of money. She asked Disneyland for some extra passes. They was like, no. She was like, oh, okay. What you say, Netflix? And just walked away. Why? It seems awfully petty, doesn't it? No, you're gonna respect me. Mm-hmm. I'm the reason you're eating.
And so that becomes an important conversation. And I want all of us to really touch on that and tie that into these Europeans, the European Americans here in Georgia, because they have consistently won Senate races, because Georgia since the 90s has gone Republican. There was a sense of dismissing black
sisters on that basketball team.
On the basketball team.
Watch this. Miss Lawson's team, WNBA team. They said, stay right there. Don't go nowhere. We'll be right back.
So you've got these sisters of the WNBA. You got Latasha Brown on Black Voters Matter. You got Stacey Abrams that said she didn't say too much. She did not concede that election. But what she said is, like all black women say, I can show you better than
I can tell you. I can show you better than I can tell you. Now you know I got mixed feelings.
And that one, I will show you better than I can tell you.
Now you know I got mixed feelings about this. We all got mixed feelings, but in the best black woman tradition, hold up 1 minute, just stay right there. Let me show you.
I had a whole bunch of conversation about it. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the things that I said to Twa before we came on is when Stacey Abrams started out, because I don't necessarily agree with all her positions, I was lukewarm on her. But as I started seeing how she moved through, it reminded me of Ma Rainey. I was surprised. I'm going to be frank. I was surprised at seeing this depiction of Ma Rainey in this movie where she wasn't backing down to anybody at that period of time. And it reminds me of Stacey Abrams. It reminds me of Latasha Brown. It reminds me of all those sisters in the WNBA and the Atlanta Dream that was like, I will show you better than I can tell you.
And real quick, and I think that that's really important because I don't think we give people in the 1910s and the 1920s the credit for how gangster they were, how much agency they had, how even when it comes to places when you should be afraid, right? Like you should be like, oh my God, what are they going to do with me? They said, oh no, what we're going to do is get up in your face. And Black people did that. That is historical record, right? Like that is what we did do. That is even in Levy's story, right? Which is tragic, right? His father lynched, right? His mother raped in front of him. But his father was like, all right, I'll sell you my land so he could get his family out of Mississippi. And then he systematically went back and tried to kill all of them, right? And it was one of those kind of things where it's like, oh, well, you could talk about how this man was lynched, but let's talk about, it might have seemed like he was grinning and laughing in this white person's face, but what he was actually doing was making sure that he got a reckoning. And the same with Ma Rainey. So a lot of people talk about her body. I mean, she had a horsehair wig on. She had a mouthful of gold teeth. That's true. She did wear this grease paint makeup that would run in these hot places in Georgia because they didn't have no air conditioning. So that is true. So she did have all this, like this unruly body, right? Like that was not cute. She wasn't all Josephine Baker-like. She wasn't trying to be.
No.
And I think that on some level, you know, what I think people from the 1920s can teach us is that they were unapologetic. And even when we say, oh, well, it's so surprising that they're just out and gay, I feel like they were more comfortable being out and gay in 1920s than they are now, right? Like, I feel like if you hear people write about it in literature, Infants of Spring, Wallace Thurman, even, you know, you could go into, you know, County Cullen, who is gay. I don't know if you know that, but there's a lot of people who literally, you know, could just talk about how they would have all these relationships and do what they wanted to do. Zora Neale Hurston, obviously, and ain't nobody paid them any kind of mind,
no
right?
Big deal.
They were just like, well, what you gonna do? W.E. Du Bois tried to get up in Zora Neale Hurston's face. It's like, oh, you just, I just don't know. This is making black people look good. And you talking trash. And she was like, and? Right? Like, sorry, you know, Du Bois, like, you can say what you want to do, but this is what I'm about to write about. So
Right.
I think that we don't give them enough credit. And that's why I think blues women are so, you know, like Angela Davis wrote a whole book about them. They are these early feminists who I think people kind of dismiss because they look at them and they say, well, look at this woman who's big and fat with a horse-haired wig on and with some gold teeth talking about things that were considered, you know, today we clutch our pearls. We're like, they sing about sex and, you know, some kind of hot dog in their roll and all this other kind of stuff. And, you know, how they don't, you know, man. And we think that's just like, for us, that's clutching pearls. But for them, they're just like, what you gonna do? What you gonna say? Good luck, right?
And that's what I love, the distinctive African nature of it. Because when one of my friends watched a movie, she was surprised that Ma Rainey had gold teeth. And I said, oh, you must have never seen anyone from the South. Because I know so many women that have gold teeth, you know, and that's a part of it. And when I started to study African culture, I was really surprised and struck when you go to Africa, you have the Fulani women with the gold teeth, right? You have some Yoruba women with the gold teeth. Mm-hmm. So that was another cultural carryover that, you know, that a lot of times we overlook. Mm-hmm. And when you link the gold teeth and you say the horsehair wig and all these aspects, they are standing up and traditionally defending African culture. And I think that's another thing that they were saying in the film with Ma Rainey. You have this Levy who was so anti-African culture. And then you have Cutler and Ma Rainey that they were defending aspects of the culture by holding on to the blues music, right? They weren't trying to give it away to the European man like Levy was. So when you think about blues, it is something that is distinctly, you know, characteristically African in nature, you know, and it's a beautiful thing. I'm glad you know, me remember that. Thanks.
I do wonder though about this, and I'm Dr. McCray, I'm interested in your comments about it, is the grease paint. So I know that part is accurate, that she was using grease paint, but I sat there and thought, like, why does her makeup look like that? And then I looked at the making of the movie and I was like, oh, I can see who the costume designer was, and because it threw me off. And so talk to me about that from a historic perspective. Did that seem accurate to you?
So I thought it was artistic license. I'm not, my primary research is not on Ma Rainey or the blues tradition or blues women. But the research that I did for today, well, actually, I'm like Sister Thandisizwe, you know, I stopped the movie and like, ooh, I gotta look this up. This makeup really bothers me. You know, what did the historic pictures of her look like? And that was definitely an exaggeration. And in listening to the costume designer's rationale, it seemed to be an expansion of a description of how Ma Rainey looked under as someone said, the hot lights in the tent in a place like Georgia in the summer, and how her makeup would run. This is not Pat McGrath makeup in 1927. So the quality, the products that went into making it would have been very different. But in looking at the pictures and the illustrations of Ma Rainey, her makeup wasn't constantly running, like when she was running errands or going to the studio. But I think it was artistic license to kind of, I really thought it was to bring out the idea, or highlight the idea, that she was not good looking by most people's standards, but that she wasn't there for that. She wasn't there for your foolish ideas about what she looked like. She knew you were there to hear her sing like nobody else, and that's what you were going to get. And she knew her worth about that, around that, and I really can respect that. And in terms,
and sometimes, sorry, go ahead.
In terms of the discussion about her sexuality, the safe spaces around sexuality, I just wanted us to not forget that when you're talking about periods, there's so many converging and overlapping periods that are being portrayed in this play. Because we talked about the Great Migration, but we didn't talk about yet the Harlem Renaissance. And because this space is also an extension of it's the period of the Harlem Renaissance. And because it's taking place in Chicago, I would say let's not forget it's foreshadowing the coming Chicago Renaissance. So Harlem is not the only place; it's just the best known place that this Renaissance of this flowering of art and cultural expression in these spaces that African Americans create for themselves, and where queer African Americans can be much more out than they can be in any other places in the country. I think we should not forget to talk about that.
And I think it's also important to note, because we're all beautiful Black people, that it was the 1920s and the flapper period was going on, which was, a rejection of all those things. So you did have a lot of people in Western society or European society questioning those gender norms, questioning where they were too. So,
And I wanted to say something about the space. So not only is the Hush Harbor thought of as a safe space, but the juke joint is a safe space, right? Like it is one of those things that converge the sacred and the profane. And so what happens in the juke joint? The jukes and juke comes from a Wolof word that means unruly, right? And you can see that even now today, like people have this dance called juking, right? So it just means that it's kind of like you jerk your body and you move all out, right? Like it's kind of like you don't have, like you are not going to follow some kind of simple dance steps and, whatever the society tells you. And this is important too, because the black bottom that they're referring to is not about her body. It was a dance in the 1920s that was really popular, like the Charleston. But if you've ever seen the Charleston that you see today, that's the white people's Charleston. The actual early Charleston was it was named from this man from Charleston. And he used to be dancing and jumping up all over the stage. And it said that he looked very African, right? Like he looked like he's from the jungle. So Black people also had this other dance that was called the Black Bottom, which was probably like it sounds, right? Like it was nasty, it was unruly. It was this kind of idea that when Black people lived in spaces in towns, oftentimes the place where they lived was called the bottom, right? Like it was the name of what they call the neighborhood. I know in Richland, I think it's called the Shako Bottom. That's where the Black people live. It's kind of under the radar. It's, you could do whatever you want. So the juke space was a place that was unwieldy. It's all this other kind of stuff. It was a place where they invented all of these things, right? Mm-hmm. That you would see people, you could do whatever behavior you wanted to do in the juke, right? You could cheat. Everybody knew you were going to cheat. If you remember that great scene in The Color Purple, right? When they back in the juke that, Erykah Badu made into a video, right? Like the juke was a place that everybody was going to be on Saturday. where they were going to plan insurrections. Like people talked about these people in Mississippi trying to organize farmers. They would go to the juke and have meetings and drink and carouse. They would fight. They would talk about problems, and not a white person could enter this place, right? Mm-hmm. It was very much only theirs. It was very much where their sort of creative space. And I think that after, music got popular like it did, like gospel did, like blues did, like all this other kind of things, when it went to the white space, it was that, I won't say the juke ever died, but it kind of like, once you saw the black bottom, and this is really key. So when white people steal the black bottom in 1927, which is why I think August Wilson chose this year, they take it on Broadway and they put it in something called the Ziegfeld Follies, right? Which was the white equivalent. And even Zora Hurston writes about this. She was like, have you seen that new black bottom? You know that black bottom shit? Because it looks nothing like what the black people were doing. They don't even recognize it. So they're like, oh, that must be some kind of new black bottom. But once it gets to Broadway, this interest in black music, black dance, and whatever becomes really paramount. So they start taking all the dances. Okay, well, how you do the Charleston? They can't do what black people do, so they do a little sanitized version of it. How do you do the black bottom? They can't do what black people do, so they do a sanitized version of it. And once they do that, black people are like, we're no longer interested. The same with the blues. Like, you think about how white people stole the blues. I mean, that's our music, but you ask younger people, are y'all interested in the blues? Who are some new blues artists? We've given that away, right? After they started, and this is what happens at the end of the play, is that she signs on the dotted line, and she decides she's going to go back to Georgia, which for her ends up being better. But for the music, right? We were like, all right, we gave it away at the end of the day. So
there's two things about that, and Thandi, I'm interested in your thoughts about it. In that moment when the studio owner is attempting to keep the money from her nephew and talking about he gonna take the nephew $25 from my Rainey money, and she was like, "No, you're not." And he thought he had her until he realized that she hadn't signed that contract. So I'm interested in your thoughts about that. Number one. Number two, speak to me about Levy and his whole presence.
Well, I mean, I get so caught up. I love these performances. Mm-hmm. I love suspending disbelief. So I'll be in there. It was a play. It was a movie. It was a TV. It's not real. I'll be like, well, she should. I wish she had just kept it a little bit, an hour longer. Just don't try. Make them come hunt for you. Just I'll be all up in it. But yeah, she gave away her bargaining chip. She decided to sign on the dotted line. We don't know I wanted to know, what does somebody read the contract? What does it say? Royalties, what's going to happen? That's where my mind goes, right?
Mm-hmm. But reality, she didn't get no money, and none of those blues people who signed. Yeah, they didn't. That's it. They got money for performing, and like a lot of music, contracts today, that people get money for performing, but they don't own the rights to their words. They don't own the masters. They don't own. Yeah. So, and then what happens at the end? You remember? Then white people make the song. I mean, this continues to happen all the way through.
This is what happened to Levy. Levy has given away these songs he's written for $5.
Right. They all did.
Yeah, they all did. But I'm saying, regarding his character, such a tragic character.
He is. I
mean, my heart went out for the character. My heart went out for Chadwick Boseman's portrayal. Just so August Wilson and this portrayal. I was going to say, when you were talking in the beginning, we talk about August Wilson and his primarily placing of strong black women, because that's who was there. This was not a figment of his imagination. This is who is in the communities. And so I read I think it's the NPR talking about Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, about how he invented these musicians the question he asked was, he's listening to the song and he says, what did it take to make this record? What went on there? And then he says he didn't want to do the research. It wasn't going to be historical, but what I believe either Corrie, I think it was Corrie, or maybe it was Tressa, someone alluded to earlier, he conjured the characters. August Wilson was a priest. I can say this because I can't say this to everybody. August Wilson conjured up these characters. They came into the room and they talked to him and they told him who they were. They told him their stories. Undoubtedly an amalgamation of, it wasn't just one levy. It was an amalgamation of experiences. And they told him, and that's how he created this story talking about exploitation and the music industry and our artists. And I'm so glad that he did. But that Levy character, he's been through so much. He's been through so much in life. You can tell he's pinning his hopes on the big time with this opportunity. And now there's no opportunity. And he's thinking about going up them stairs after this white man, but he changes his mind. And in the end, he takes it out on Glenn Turman's character. I forgot the brother's name. Toledo. I think it was Toledo. Toledo. And being born and raised in LA, the first thing I thought of was stepping on brother's shoes.
That's what I thought. In New York. That's what I thought.
Problem. You have a problem on your hands if you have stepped on my Nikes, on my Timbs, on whatever. And it's never about the shoes. It was never about the shoes.
I think it's about the hate and the rage that's turned inward. And because I know a lot of times they talked about this play, they said is a perfect example of Black rage, right? Mm-hmm. So you have these people that are feeling powerless to really hurt the people who are, who hurt them. So they do the next thing by turning on to somebody else, right? And I think that was really tragic. And another thing that I thought was tragic, and it may be an unpopular opinion, is that I really wish that they would have centered more on Ma Rainey. I get it that he conjured up these characters. I get it that he wanted to say, okay, what was it like to be a musician? But I really do wish that we got to know more of her story. Again, the woman is lurking in the background. She's the catalyst for men to express the things that they're going through. And I'm not saying that it's not relevant. And I'm not saying that it's not valid. But her story has just as much pain. It has just as much exploitation. It has just as much unfairness, so we didn't have to really look at that. And I understand he didn't want to write a historical drama, but I really wish that we had more of a woman's perspective.
But, also, I think, and I understand and I appreciate everything you said, but in this little glimpse that we had, again, it was not a biopic. Obviously, they didn't watch their own show in the UK or they didn't read the materials. It's not a biopic. It's about this one particular day. And in that one particular day, we see how Ma Rainey handled white people and eventually how Levy handles white people. He tells us, you don't know nothing about me. And no, we didn't know that history. But at the end of the day, you can see he was thinking about going up them stairs after that white man. Mm-hmm. And then he changed his mind. Whereas Ma Rainey from the beginning, I ain't studying you people. I am not.
I really, I want to kind of turn this for a second. So we talked about Levy. Let's talk about Chadwick Boseman, because we know that this was his last performance. And as I was sitting there and I looked at it, so from a psychologist perspective, I'm like, dang, this brother knows he's dying and he is leaving it all on the floor. Mm-hmm. He's going all in this performance because to me, it's believable. Now, whether or not you stab somebody in the back over some shoes, I don't know about that, but I'm realizing, and it really made me think, am I going all in every aspect of my life? Do I give it my all? Like this is going to be my last performance, Like, this is the last thing I get to write. This is the last thing I get to say to a client. This is the last thing that I get to do. And I wonder if any of you sat there and just took a moment to think about, what does this mean to watch this man dying on screen, but at the same time living?
Dying so loudly is what was kind of coming to me in the experience of it. And I wanted to go back to what Tani was saying, which I think ties in with this term, Ifetayo, is really what August is doing is ancestral storytelling. This is the crux of what it is, to conjure with the intention of giving voice to our ancestors in ways that they would not have been able to tell their own stories. And I wonder if that's why we don't hear, because I'm younger, but I'm a huge fan of August Wilson and have seen several of the plays. And so I wonder if that's why we don't see him tell Black women's stories in the same way, because of his own position as a Black man. And so inevitably, when I'm doing ancestral storytelling, I'm telling all the Black women's stories. It ain't no Black men in my configurations. But the critical nature of being able to enter into that, and for Chadwick to have the opportunity to cross out of by crossing into, seemed just very sacred to me in my observation of it. And even more so when I watched the interview of Viola talking about how she got so excited, and even her husband said the same thing, when the fat suit came for Ma Rainey, because for her, that signified her ability to lose herself in the character and to fully take on who Ma Rainey was, because her body was her. And the critical nature of the spiritual and physical and embodied experience of that. And so I imagine it had to have been for Chadwick Boseman. And so for me, this felt very much so paramount, like Black Panther, because these are the heroic stories that we don't always have access to, which is the gift of folks like August Wilson and all of our lineages when it comes to ancestral storytelling, because then it gives us a window to do the same.
I wanted to jump in too and talk about Levy's character and this concept that through Levy's character, August Wilson was really depicting Black rage. That the Black rage that I think, I was listening to your head, Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. I mean, in your head, I was listening to your voice. In my head, I was listening to your voice. 3 times. 3rd time is a charm, right? When I'm watching this, because we see that Black rage as an end result, but what we hear in the dialogue is the trauma that got him there, right? And all the historical aspects of what produced that trauma. And as far as I understand, that's what August Wilson wanted to portray on the stage, Black life writ large, open, raw. So, but I think beyond that, when you think about Chadwick Boseman, when you think about August Wilson, you know, when I was thinking about it, I thought, how productive can this Black rage be? Because that's what we're left with. And we're left to think about, like, what can Black rage produce other than death and destruction? But when I looked into, I suspected that because of his age and because of his approach, August Wilson was a product of the Black arts movement. But when I went into the research, I was like, wow, this is deeper than I thought. He really is a direct product of Pittsburgh's Black Power movement. He specifically grew up in the Hill District, and he co-founded the Black Horizon Theater there, which with, as he said in his own words, I think to Ed Bradley, the journalist Ed Bradley, this was a product of the Black Power movement. I started this with my friends. And so when you, Professor Waithe brought up Levy's character as an expression of Black rage, I was like, yeah, this is something that Black rage can produce, because so many people associate Black power with Black rage. But, you know, when it's channeled, when people get to work and say, what can we build instead of destroying, you know, this kind of space for Black actors to tell Black stories, ancestral stories, African descended people's stories. This is a beautiful product of it. So I wanted to talk about that, but then I also wanted to say that that was the generation who followed this generation that's being portrayed in 1927. So this generation of the Great Migration come to fulfill some of those promises, have some of the promise of migration fulfilled, but in other ways, they encounter this kind of violence, this kind of oppression. And what their children, their offspring produce is the civil rights movement. That's what author Isabel Wilkerson pointed out. And I would like to also say they produce the conditions that they find in the North in cities like Pittsburgh produce the Black Power movement, and then these kinds of the spaces for Black art. So in my research, I interviewed women who were a part of Black Power formations that were in places like Pittsburgh. And I was able to interview a lady named Tamanika House, who grew up in the Hill District, whose activism was about starting Black Power formations. And so I said, oh, wow, this is an interesting overlap. But then when I looked at my interview with her, she was influenced by Rob Penny, a man named Rob Penny, who co-founded the Black Horizon Theater along with August Wilson. And her husband had been one of the actors who worked under August Wilson. So we could talk about, you know, what she saw in the Hill District and the kinds of conditions that produce artists like August Wilson, if we have time.
Well, and we're actually, this conversation has been so good and it went so quickly. We're actually coming at the end of our time, but I want it to be balanced. So I feel like, because we started out and my brother Twa was saying that August Wilson sent us these strong Black women. And then we had, you know, because we have strong Black women on here, we kind of cut our brother. So I feel like we got to bring Twa back to the
it's no problem. My last statement is that these discussions as artists, I think we enjoy, because it allows us to see what our work can do and how it can create these types of dialogue. I think that when you look at August's work, and not just his work, I heard you all talk about that Black anger, that Black pain. When I look at August's work, I see so many other people's works. There's a work, and my goal is to get people to just go out and read and see theater. One of my favorite plays is a play called Who Got His Own, and it deals with a brother whose father is angry. He dies, and everybody comes to the funeral, and everybody's, oh, we love him, and nobody liked him because he was an asshole, and he was abusive. He used to beat his mom, and but in the play, his mom finally tells him why. His mama tells him why his dad was so angry. And when I see Chadwick Boseman's character, that character comes to mind. Because, you know, what happened is that this dude tried to hold in his rage. And once he found out what happened to his father, which is his father saw, basically Chadwick's story, his father saw his mother get raped. And his father went, and people don't know, a lot of our families moved from the South to different places to get away because, you know, their dad or their uncle may have killed somebody white because of, you know, retaliation. And so in this story, he has his white friend, and out of the blue, he goes over to his white friend's house and he says, I finally saw that my white friend didn't see me. He didn't see my anger. He didn't see my pain. And he ends up beating his white friend to death. Just out of just realizing at that point, his mama told him this story about how his father used to clean up in the meat packing houses, and they used to call him outhouse or shithouse Joe. That's what they called him. And his father was so angry, so his father used to bring all that anger home to the house, and he just tried to hold it in, but he saw how his sister went out and started dating white men. You know, he saw how all of this started to embody this pain and this anger, and didn't have a way of releasing. That's why it's so interesting to see all these educated Black women. Some of you all are in dealing with psychology and dealing with how oppression and this whole thing called racism affects us. And I used to always tell people like, well, how Black men so angry? I think because we have a hard time dealing with manhood and what that means and what that looks like on the other side. And I think a lot of times it's been terrible because we've taken that anger out on our women and our families. And I think that's why August, and I heard somebody say something about they wish he would have centered around Rainey. August said this all the time. He had a hard time dealing with trying to write women characters. If you look at all of his plays, he has a strong woman in there, but he said, my goal is not to be stereotypical coming from this man's point of view. I want to tell the story as clear and as plain as I've seen the women in my life. And if you look at all of his plays, that's been the recurring theme that he tries to do as much as he can, not to write a stereotypical Black woman.
Yeah, and I think that's part of. So thank you, Twa. We're gonna have to stop right there on that piece. I think that is important. You know, I mean, and I can respect that. This idea, like, I'm not a woman, and one of the things that we didn't bring up, we don't have time to talk about, is the fact that August Wilson was biracial. That his father was white. You know, I think from Germany. I can't remember where he's from. I know he wasn't from the U.S. And I think about how that must have impacted him too, and the difficult relationship that August Wilson had with his father. The thing that I go back to for Jamila, when you said, you know, when we have rage, what do we have left? And we see where Levy's rage left him to kill someone, and he had all this rage, and he didn't really take it out on the white man that was directly taking advantage of him. He takes it out on someone else that was innocent. And it to me, it reminds me of what I see all the time, is the unfortunate space of Black trauma, Black rage turning internally, or whether it's internal in terms of ourselves, in terms of our community. But I do think that in order for us to be able to understand and heal rage, that we can't just put it all in a category of it's not useful. Today, as we're doing this, one of the things that we know is that Black rage did do something.
Oh, yes.
And earlier, we understand, you know, Black rage is the thing that won this election today.
Black rage is what got us to the polls.
Exactly.
Black rage, but also understanding this white rage backlash. But what we know is that we are ready, right? Like, so that's what, you know, everybody could have seen this nonsense coming, right? Because we know this is what happens. When we get a little bit ahead, we see them go, you know, so, but we're ready, right? Like, we've had our ancestors who's told us what to do. If we would just listen, I think we would get there. Yeah.
And I think the strategy of it too, we can't miss, right? Like the spiritual strategy, the political strategy, the community organizing strategy. We don't get Black club women without Black blues women. Like we
exactly.
Can't get we don't get sororities without Ma Rainey. And we have to be able to see those lines and those strategies, and how this itself is our legacy to inhabit and to embody, which is what's happening right now, which is why, you know, on the 20th of January, we're going to have a Black woman for vice president. I might not agree with Kamal. That's not even the point. But women at Howard and Morehouse have their place for a reason.
Right.
And it's not absent from August Wilson. It's not absent from Levy. It's because of.
Right.
And I love that tie-in, and Thandi and Kumba, I want to get you to give your last comments. I love that tie-in because, again, I mean, I was sitting here looking at these commercials, and you see these candidates again campaigning on white supremacy, and you might as well have George Wallace in in one of these campaign ads, and I'm like, and you attacking a pastor. You talking a pastor of a historic Black church. What do you think is going to happen? All right.
They didn't know.
And that's to understand.
They know now.
Those angels came from Africa. They finally came.
Look, I ain't never been so glad Paula White conjured something in my life. Ever. The conjuring was incorrect, but the effect was astounding.
What they say, they might not come what you want them. They always come on time. Because I was like, oh,
and that's the thing, that regardless of whether we label ourselves as Christians or Ifa people or Vodun people or Muslims, one of the things that we understand is spirit and the power and the connection with the ancestors. And when you're dealing with that level of evil, sometimes your rage just needs to push you forward into action, because they will destroy themselves. That's all that we need.
That's all.
And Kuumba, what are your last comments?
My last comment. Well, I started out saying that I'm having mixed feelings about what has happened. White supremacy is so crass. It's so gutter.
I love that.
If you're not careful, it can turn you into a reactionary. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so I've always known Black women had magic, that we're strong, that we're powerful. I'm not really on the rah-rah, Stacey Abrams. Yeah, I knew, you just now finding out. But the mixed feelings is, it's like we're saving the US again. We got to stop saving it and remake it. I mean, we engage in what we believe to be harm reduction. We are the caretakers of our communities. At a certain point, we got to stop saving and just do over. We have to recreate. We have to do over. We have to stop saving this mess. Mm. We got to stop saving because we've been saving these people from themselves. That's basically what we've been doing. Now we need to save ourselves. We've got to save ourselves.
I love that.
And I would like us just to take a cue from the play and from the movie, where we have all of the anger and rage of the young people, right? We have to point them in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Because Cutler, he represented the old ideas, maybe the generation before. He represented African culture, a tie back to the past, a tie to our roots, right? And so when Levy had that rage, he misdirected it. So I think one of the things that we need to try to do is to make sure when we have these young people and they're protesting, don't forget your culture. Don't kill your culture. Don't disconnect from it, because that's the main thing that's going to save us and push us forward. We can't do anything. We can't be anything unless we embrace our African culture. That is the thing that time and time have saved us, and will save us. Right, sure. Always that tie back.
I love that. And one of the things that this story reminded me of is when you look at the character of Levy, and then we know that in real life, Ma Rainey did record this song, and a few years later, because she had not moved forward with the times, then she was dropped from the record company, and because they had moved on to jazz. And so to me, it's that balance. I always think about that balance of being able to have that connection with our young folks and then having that ancestral connection. And we need both of those things.
Yes, we do.
So that's the foundation of our power. So as we end this conversation on this day of this historic moment when African people and Jewish people have showed white supremacy, what we can do, then I want to thank each one of my guests my sister Kaumba Nozibele, who is a professor and owner of Grand Tressa, Reverend Estee Nena Dillard, got 50 million names like I will always say. And she is the owner of that amazing company. Let me tell you the name of it real quick. I'm going back to all of my little notes. In the spiritual counseling, Professor Dr. Corrie Claiborne, she's associate professor at Morehouse College in African American Literature. My sister Thandisizwe, Chimurenga, I know I'm gonna get that name right. She is a journalist and author and a social commentator, always keeping us sharp in this conversation. And then my sister, my long-term sister friend, who we have raised our children together and done so much. We done fell out, fell in, all that other kind of stuff. Dr. Kenja McCray, who's associate professor at Atlanta Metropolitan State College. Thank you, ladies, for this conversation.
Don't forget Twa.
Oh, Twa, I'm sorry, long-term friend. And we'll put him back in for a second. My brother Twa Nadabuluku, who is, like I said, the one that introduced me to the importance of the work of August Wilson. Thank you each.
I'm just honored to be able to be a fly on the wall.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to continue this conversation. I am still doing this. I am mostly on Wednesdays. I am generally on Instagram. So come check me out on Instagram on Wednesdays at 3:00. Next Wednesday, I got my personal massage therapist who is amazing. We're going to talk about massage and the importance of that for being able to take care of our bodies as we do this work. So come check me out next Wednesday. All right. Take care.
Y'all stay safe. Take care. Peace.